"You're dead to us," my son said. His voice sharp, his eyes colder than I ever imagined they could be. The words fell in front of a room full of people dressed in white linen and champagne smiles. Music faded. Conversation stopped. Even the laughter held its breath. I stood there holding a glass of water, not wine, not celebration. Just silence. Around me, the chandeliers sparkled too brightly, and the petals on the centerpieces looked like something meant for funerals. He stared at me like a stranger. I suppose he had been one for years. I just never admitted it. Behind him, Felicity glanced over her shoulder, her smile already back on for the cameras. My ex-husband looked away, as if he could pretend I hadn't just been erased. They all thought I would leave, bow out gracefully, accept the shame. But they forgot something. I was not there to be silent. I came with truth, and I came to speak. If you've ever poured your life into someone who later treated you like a stranger, if you've watched your love be repaid with silence, distance, or rejection, then you understand what this moment felt like. Hit that like button if you've been told to stay quiet when you knew the truth deserved to be heard. Subscribe for more stories where justice is not just about revenge, it is about reclaiming dignity, one decision at a time. My name is Elaine Hartley. I'm 64 years old. I worked as a nurse for over 3 decades, spent most of my adult life holding hands through pain, answering calls in the night, and keeping families together when it felt like their world was falling apart. But somehow, I couldn't keep my own from slipping through my fingers. My son, Miles, was born when I was 29. His father, Daniel, was the only man I ever truly fell for, quiet, kind, and with a way of holding my hand like the world might disappear if he let go. When we lost him in a car accident, Miles was only 7. I remember sitting on the hospital bench after Daniel's body was identified, and Miles asleep in my lap, asking if his father would be back in the morning. I told him no, and in that moment, I promised myself I'd make up for it all. I worked long hours, sometimes doubles, sometimes back-to-back weekends. But I always made sure Miles had dinner on the table and someone to talk to before bed. We were close. Not just mother and son, but companions. I listened when he cried after school, helped him with his science projects, saved for his college, and never remarried, not for 12 years. When Gregory came into my life, I was 41. A quiet man. Widowed, like me. He never tried to replace Miles's father, only to be a soft presence in the background. But Miles was resistant from the start. Polite, but distant. I told myself he'd grow into it. That the discomfort would fade. It didn't. He pulled further and further away. By the time he moved out for college, he called less, visited rarely, and only when he needed something. I kept reaching. Care packages, birthday cards, voicemails. I never stopped showing up, even when it was clear he wanted space. Gregory passed 3 years ago after a quiet battle with pancreatic cancer. He was strong until the end, and gentle even in pain. I was alone again. But I told myself maybe now Miles would come back to me. He didn't. Instead, I met Felicity. Not through a warm introduction, but through a photo Miles emailed. Her smile was neat. Her voice, when I eventually heard it, always sounded rehearsed. Miles seemed proud of her. Not affectionate, just proud. As if she were a prize he'd earned. She never called me by name. Only Mrs. Hartley at first, then eventually Elaine with that clipped tone I couldn't unhear. Things shifted quietly. Invitations didn't come. I learned about events after they'd passed. When they bought their house, I offered to help with furniture. Felicity thanked me and then texted a registry link for a gift card. I offered a family heirloom, a small wooden hope chest, carved by my grandfather. Felicity told Miles it didn't match their aesthetic. It was subtle, at first. A wedding planned without my input. Miles saying, "It's just easier if her parents handle it, they have the experience." A rehearsal dinner where my name was on the last seat at the table, next to the DJ's equipment. A message saying I didn't need to bring a +1 because they were limiting extra guests. It was always dressed in diplomacy, but it landed the same. I wasn't welcome. Not truly. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Told myself it was a busy time. Young couples forget to call, overlook things. But then I overheard a conversation at a pre-wedding brunch. Felicity laughing to her friend, saying, "She just clings. I think she likes pretending Miles is still hers." That night, I sat alone in my living room. A bottle of wine untouched on the counter. The chest I once offered them tucked under a blanket near the couch. Something changed. Not in them, but in me. There was no dramatic argument. No slammed doors or angry declarations. The erasure happened in slow, deliberate steps, like peeling paint from an old wall. I just kept pretending I didn't see it. The invitations for the wedding arrived in ornate envelopes. Inside, the card read, "Hosted with love by the Covingtons." That was Felicity's family. My name wasn't anywhere. I looked at the RSVP line, paused, then filled it out. Yes, I would attend. I would show up, even if I wasn't wanted. At the bridal shower, Felicity barely acknowledged me. Her mother gave me that sideways look people reserve for servers who bring the wrong wine. When I handed Felicity a small velvet box, she smiled without opening it and set it aside. Inside was a ring, rose gold, small diamond, once given to me by Daniel after Miles was born. I thought it might mean something, a symbol of family. But it was never even unwrapped. 2 days later, a courier returned it to my door with a note, "We've chosen something that fits better with the theme." A week before the wedding, I called Miles. Just to talk. Just to hear something familiar in his voice. Instead, I got silence after every question. I asked if he'd received my gift. He cleared his throat and said, "Felicity's parents are handling all gifts now. It's simpler." Then added, "You've been overwhelming." That word echoed long after the call ended. Overwhelming. I stayed up that night reading old birthday cards he'd made me when he was little. Crayon drawings, glitter smudged onto the corners. "You're my favorite person," one read. I wondered when that had stopped being true. But nothing prepared me for what came next. 2 days before the wedding, my phone buzzed. A text from Miles. No greeting. No warmth. Just 5 words. "Please don't come to Saturday." I stared at it for a long time. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the follow-up. "It's too much having you there. We need peace." I didn't reply. I sat very still. The house felt too quiet, as if it had swallowed every sound except the one in my chest. I thought of Gregory, and how he would have never let this happen. I thought of all the mornings I walked to work in snow to keep the lights on. I thought of packing lunches, ironing uniforms, sitting in ER waiting rooms while Miles healed from sprained ankles and broken hearts. I was being erased in plain sight. That night, I unlocked the drawer in the hallway credenza. Inside was the box Gregory left behind. He'd told me to open it when I felt lost. I hadn't touched it. Not after his funeral, not on anniversaries. I didn't want another goodbye. But I opened it. Inside was a letter. His handwriting, slow and even. He wrote about Miles. About the years he tried to connect with him. About the things he did quietly, behind the scenes, to keep our family whole. There was also a folder with receipts, notarized documents, and one signed agreement. It turned out Gregory had used part of his life insurance to help Miles buy the house he now lived in with Felicity. He'd transferred funds discreetly, trusting that Miles would pay it back eventually. It was never about money for Gregory. It was about loyalty. The agreement had one line that stood out. Asterisk, if she ever forgets what she gave, remind her that I never did. Asterisk, I closed the folder, sat back, and realized the depth of the silence I'd lived with. They thought I was a shadow. But shadows remember everything. And I was done apologizing for existing. The next morning, I stood at the kitchen counter and reread Gregory's letter. Not for comfort, but for clarity. The soft warmth of his words had been written with purpose, not sentiment. This wasn't just a goodbye. It was a quiet instruction. A door left open for me to walk through when I was ready to stop begging to be seen. I took the folder to Gregory's lawyer, a man named Charles Monroe. He'd handled our affairs for years, and when I walked into his office with the documents, he looked at me the way people do when they recognize strength after too long. He made a few calls, checked the validity of what I had, and said gently, "This is more than enough. Are you sure you want to go through with it?" I didn't answer right away. I watched the rain streak the window behind him. Then I said, "They invited the silence. I'm simply responding." That day, we began building the structure of the truth. Paperwork. Financial transfers. A list of assets Gregory had helped fund. The list was longer than I expected: appliances, furniture, the home's down payment. Even the renovation Miles once bragged about doing himself had been paid for by Gregory, with proof tucked away in tidy folders. I started to gather more. Quietly. I went to the house while they were out, using the spare key they never bothered to ask back for. I took photos, not to intimidate, but to document. The bookshelf Gregory assembled, the paintings I gifted, even the set of wine glasses from our wedding. Everything had been slowly consumed without acknowledgement. There were no tears during this time. No shaky hands. I became methodical. Detached. The kind of focus that only comes when pain has burned through every layer and left something sharp behind. I ordered a pendant to be made. Gregory's wedding band melted and reshaped into a small, discreet drop of gold. It wasn't for them. It was for me. A reminder of loyalty given quietly, and of the mistake they made thinking it would stay buried. Then, I did something unexpected. I RSVP'd again for the wedding. Yes, I would attend. No mention of the text Miles had sent. No confrontation. I mailed it in with calm handwriting and no note. I wanted them to believe they'd succeeded. That I was shrinking back into the corners like they wanted. I let the silence breathe for the next 3 days. The night before the ceremony, I packed one bag. Not with gifts, not with apologies, but with evidence, dignity, and the knowledge that when I walked into that venue, it wouldn't be as a forgotten guest. It would be as someone with nothing left to lose and everything left to say. The wedding was held at an estate just outside the city. Long gravel roads, trimmed hedges, and a venue that smelled more of money than love. I arrived early, not to cause a scene, but to watch. From the back row of the ceremony, I saw everything. Miles stood at the altar, straight-backed and rehearsed. Felicity wore an ivory gown that shimmered under the chandeliers. The Covingtons smiled like royalty, their friends full of glassy compliments and shallow admiration. No one looked toward me. That was expected. The ceremony ended without hesitation. Vows, applause, a kiss framed by rose petals. Then came the reception, tables draped in white, centerpieces as tall as my shoulders, music soft and expensive. I sat at table 19. Alone. Near the kitchen doors. They wanted me hidden. Tucked away like a misplaced invitation. A man I didn't recognize approached and said kindly, "Are you with the Hartley family?" I answered without emotion, "I was once." Felicity's father made the first speech. He spoke about discipline, vision, ambition. About building things that last. I watched Miles nod along as if these values had come from the Covingtons. Then Miles took the microphone. His voice was smooth, full of charm. He said they'd built their life together with no handouts. That everything they had came from hard work. That independence had shaped them. And that was the moment. I rose slowly. I walked toward the microphone, each step measured. No rush, no anger. Only precision. Miles looked confused. Felicity narrowed her eyes. The room quieted again, just as it had the night he disowned me. I took the mic. I wasn't planning to speak today. But since we're honoring truth and legacy, it seems right. I paused. No one moved. Gregory Hartley helped you buy your home. He paid off debts you pretended didn't exist. He funded renovations, gifted furniture, even paid for the car you proposed in. He didn't do it for praise. He did it because he believed in family. And because you were my son. The room shifted. A murmur passed through the guests. I didn't raise my voice. I let the words land quietly, like rain on marble. You're free to erase people. But don't rewrite history while doing it. I walked toward their table and set a small box down beside Felicity's glass. Inside was the pendant. It's made from Gregory's ring. The man you both decided was unnecessary. You can keep it. And then I turned. I didn't look back. Not once. Behind me, the silence was loud. Chairs scraping. Forks clinking awkwardly. The sound of a celebration collapsing inward. By the time I reached the car, the air had shifted. Evening light spilled over the gravel, and the estate behind me looked less like a wedding and more like a stage that had just gone dark. Miles followed me outside. He was breathing hard, jacket off, his tie crooked. You had no right, he said, but his voice wavered. I stood still, the passenger door open. No. I had every right. You just never thought I'd use it. He didn't respond. His hands moved as if he was searching for something else to say. I watched him struggle with the weight of a truth he had buried for years. You ruined everything, he muttered. No, Miles. I revealed it. He didn't argue again. Back at home, the silence felt cleaner. I took off my shoes, lit a candle beside Gregory's photo, and sat by the window. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to apologize for anything. The next day, Charles sent over the final draft of the repayment claim. It wasn't about the money. It was about accountability. The letter went out by courier, formal, quiet, irreversible. That evening, my phone buzzed. Messages from Miles. Apologies. Confusion. Explanations. I read each one without reaction. Not out of cruelty, but because I had nothing left to answer with. I picked up Gregory's letter once more and ran my finger along the final line. When people forget who you are, remind them what you're made of. And I had. There's a moment that comes after the storm, when everything is still, and you realize you're no longer holding your breath. That was me in the days that followed. Not angry. Not vindicated. Just free. I spent so many years trying to be enough for everyone. To explain myself, to soften my edges, to be accepted. But sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is stop explaining. Silence is not the absence of love. It's the end of pleading. Miles will make his choices. So will Felicity. I no longer stand in their shadows, hoping to be pulled into the light. What I learned is simple: you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to speak when it matters. And when I did, I didn't just change the room. I changed myself. Have you ever poured yourself into someone, only to be cast aside when your story no longer served theirs? Share your experience in the comments. I want to hear from those who've carried others, only to be told they were never needed. And if you believe that truth has a time of its own, measured, patient, but unstoppable, then like this video. Subscribe for more cinematic revenge stories where justice is not loud, but deeply personal. Because sometimes, the quietest voices leave the deepest marks. And sometimes, walking away is the final, most powerful word.